Information about the world of running, inspiration to fuel passion and excellence, and ideas for making connections and finding community. You're listening to A to Z Running. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the A to Z Running podcast, where we help runners thrive. I'm Andy.
And I am Zach. And Andrei is tackling the challenge of how to grow the sport of track and field. And he joins us here to share what he has been learning and an exclusive look into what's coming when his documentary premieres this summer. And what many hope to be instrumental in revolutionizing the sport. Yes,
Exciting.
Revolutionizing. And that is coming soon. But stick around after that for recent updates from the world of running, including the USA Cross Country Championships, new ultra marathon records, and some fascinating backstories on amazing runners. And so much more is at your fingertips. If only,
Or your ears.
If only you would go to AtoZrunning.com
Oh, yeah.
and look for the word follow. That's it.
And we love connecting with you. We mention it every week how we're enjoying getting to know some of you more as we're able to engage with one another and create community. So we asked last week for some Q&A for our episode that we're going to have upcoming. And many of you have already submitted some questions, and we're really excited to talk about them on the show. If you haven't yet, that's totally fine. Feel free to reach out to us.
Yeah, hit those places where you can send messages, like Instagram or like comments on YouTube, or find us on AtoZrunning.com/contact, an easy way to send us a direct message. And so we may feature your question and our thoughts, response to on that upcoming episode.
Yeah, and now remember to add the context, because that's going to help us dive into it more intimately, because there are different contexts in which there would be different answers to the questions that you might have.
Exactly, because that is the point. That is the point.
That's the point.
No good answer to any question happens in isolation outside of context. It always happens in the context, if it's a good answer. So we want to provide good responses and good thoughts, and so we want the context.
Cool. So we talk about on this show that one of the things we want to do is to connect with community, ideas to connect with community. And I found some community with some of you on Instagram. Jamal Davis created this coffee posse, and he interviewed me last week, and so I'll link to that. But we just talk about life and sport, and it's really fun.
Not coffee? You don't talk about coffee?
I mean, he asks about the coffee too, but usually we do these kind of conversations over coffee. So if you've been wondering what that's all about, you can follow Jamal Davis. I'll link to him in AtoZrunning.com as well. But we are grateful for many of you who have had ideas to connect community. And thanks to Jamal for having me on the show and involving me in your community.
Excellent. Well, speaking of having people on shows and talking and involving communities, let's get right to our main topic with Andrei.
Today, we're talking about running as a sport. And you may have noticed that our podcast episode is in quotation, State of the Sport, and that's because it's referring to a documentary that we're going to talk about coming up with our guest, Andrei. But the idea, do you know running as a sport? Do you follow it as a sport? There's fans all over the world that obsess about sports such as football and soccer, but what about track and field and running? Now, in other parts of the globe, it is super popular, but here in the US, where we have tons of people who run and are part of the running community, the running sport has not become as prevalent, and there is not as many fans of the sport of running as what you might anticipate with how many people participate in the sport itself. So likely, if you listen to this podcast, you probably have some interest in the sport of running. We have the World of Running segment every week. So we hope today's episode will only invigorate your interest that is already there, and you can kind of learn what we can do as fans and participants of the running community to help elevate the sport. So today, we unpack the state of the sport, which is the title of our guest documentary. And that is Andrei. He's a film director, content creator, and coach. And Alex's tagline is awesome, and it's show up for the sport. And you'll see that throughout his content that he creates. And Alex in this episode dives into how to raise the bar in the sport and provide opportunity and connection for fans and participants. His pursuits have been recognized and propelled by opportunities with Nike, USATF, and now independently as the artist in resident at the Graduate Eugene Hotel. So, the State of the Sport documentary, we're going to mention it. We have a trailer that we're going to link to as part of the AtoZrunning.com, so you'll be able to watch that there. And some things to think about as we discuss this episode: where the sport is at, what can be done to improve it, and how the running community can get involved. Let's talk to Alex. Hey, Alex, welcome to the AtoZrunning podcast.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here with you.
It's great to see you again, because we were able to see you at that Austin meet. That was really cool to connect there. And then following your journey like since then has been really cool too, because you've been up to a lot. So I know that there's a lot for us to unpack about the sport of running, but let's hear about what you're doing right now, Alex.
Sure. Yeah. So, since February, we kind of met on the pretense that I was doing this little film project, trying to reach out to runners in the sport and trying to tell this little story of where the sport is going, where it's headed, and who are the players in the mix of it. And that was supposed to be something that was going to lead up to the Olympic Games. And it was going to be a nice little short film that I was working on putting on together. One thing led to another, and it slowly but surely started spiraling out of control in the best way possible. But so as of right now, while I live in Columbus, Ohio, I am basically currently the easiest way to say is I live in a hotel now. I'm the artist in residence at the Graduate Eugene Hotel here in Eugene, Oregon. And I've been here for 2.5, 3 months already. I have one more month left of my residency. And I'm speaking to you currently from the studio that they basically hand built for me and tailored around my needs, so that I have both my room upstairs on the 11th floor, and then I come downstairs, I grab my coffee and my breakfast, and I get to work on this film that is now a much bigger project than I ever anticipated it would be.
Absolutely. Is this like a dream come true?
It's a dream that I never knew I had coming true. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because it started as one thing and then it morphed into another, and here you are creating. And I'm so glad, because I've seen content that you've created before, and this is definitely something that's really cool, and your passions align with a lot of what we want to see from the running world. So thank you for what you're doing. So tell us about your film project.
Sure. So my project is going to be titled State of the Sport. And similar to a State of the Union address, it is taking this really big picture look into the sport of specifically track and field. But, along with track and field comes the sport of running. And so we're doing a really deep dive into the sport of running at the professional level. And it's really important for me to try to tell that story, targeting basically an audience that is a little bit divided, because so many people in our sport are runners and they love running and with the people in the community, but a lot of people don't know a ton about how the professional sport operates. At the same time, you have the audience that is the diehard track and field fan. They could tell you their 20 favorite runners and every metric and time that they've ran in the past 10 years. But there's a disconnect between the future of the sport and where the sport is going, because they're stuck on kind of what's going on right now. And so I'm trying to mesh these two worlds together, and I'm bringing in, so far I have over 50 interviews, and I've talked to people who, everyone from the Galen Rupps of the sport, and most literally Galen Rupp, to, people that are high schoolers and are just running in their community and in their leagues that don't know much about the sport, but I'm trying to pick their brains about where they're grabbing content from, what they're interested in, who they're following, so that we can kind of mesh it all together to tell this overarching story of the sport.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lot to dive into. Like you said, you already have lots of interviews of people with all kinds of experiences. Have there been something else? I don't want there to be like a spoiler or anything, but like, are there some things that are a common thread, or like things that you're seeing, patterns, anything that you'd like to share?
Definitely. Yeah. And so a good example is that we can look into is the way that media surrounding the sport of track and field is shared. you guys are a big part of that too, especially in seeing the way that podcasts have started exploding. At the same time, journalism within the sport is really changing. We're starting to move away from, just the flow track workout Wednesday videos that you see on YouTube with a shaky camera, and groups are taking these productions into their own hands, and we're seeing some high quality, stories being told. And that storytelling is a big part of how the sport is growing. At the same time, social media is a thing, and it's a thing in all of our lives, whether we want it to be or not. And for the athlete that has a professional contract, we're starting to see changes in those contracts that there's things that they have to post on social media now. And it's not necessarily something to force them to do that, but it's to help build their own image. And so a lot of athletes are building partnerships, and through those partnerships, more money is coming into the sport. And there's a lot of nuances into how those relationships are formed, how people are learning to create those relationships. And at the same time, there's questions about, well, where is all the money going? Who is seeing the biggest cut of it, and why isn't it the athletes? And so, whether it's that kind of journalistic approach into asking questions that are harder and kind of buried, or just looking at the way that athletes are continuing to succeed and the way stories are being told, those are a few of the big things that I'm kind of touching on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a lot to unpack there. It's interesting when you talked about the social media piece being such a vital aspect to an athlete, and likely the money that they will receive based on their exposure, impressions, all of those things. I thought it was interesting. I saw I don't know if it was a meme or a tweet. It was a long time ago, but it was like a recording artist was saying, now I have to be a model, a photographer, a videographer, an editor. Like I have to be all these things in order to be relevant on social media. Has that been a concern for some athletes? Like, how am I going to produce my way to showing my value? Because it used to be pretty simple with sports. In anything, really. It's just like you go, you wake up, you you do your thing, and you are excellent at it. Now there's a lot more.
Yeah, there's a ton more. And you kind of walk into the sport as an athlete, and when you're in college, let's say you're a college athlete who's kind of at the top of their game, you have an entire social media team provided by the university that is covering your team, that is covering, Oregon Track and Field is a great example. My friend Matt Parker, as a creative director for Oregon Track and Field, their content is scheduled, and they do such a deliberate job of putting the lens on the athletes. Once you leave the university and you leave these institutions that are helping to push you, you're kind of stuck pushing yourself, and you don't have those resources anymore to do it for you, essentially. And so that's kind of where we're seeing with a few athletes, we're seeing this big question of what now? Not only are they faced with having to seek out a contract on their own, or start working with an agent that they don't have a formal relationship with, and it's a question of, who do I trust, who is looking out for my best interests? Because a lot of it too is you need to protect yourself in these kinds of spaces. So you don't want to sign into something that is going to be a long-term loss for you just because of what pictures you see up front. And so for a lot of athletes and coaches, that's a big part of, I guess the best way to put it is, it's a big part of who they don't really care to get involved with, but they kind of have to. Mm-hmm. It's at the same time, we have athletes like Colleen Quigley is a great example, who, in talking to her, she is all on board with this side of the sport. She is one of the best at making partnerships happen and promoting products that she believes in. So it really comes down to, I think, just personality. Some people would rather not share their personal lives. That doesn't mean that you can't be successful in the sport. We look at Galen Rupp, and he is not on any form of social media, and he is on, his own plane when you look at him against any other athlete. For better or worse, that's up to you to decide, but he's there. So yeah, it's an interesting dichotomy there.
Yeah. So let's talk about the money. You're saying like these contracts they're having to negotiate, protect themselves. And there's so much that goes into it because this sport is also a business. So have you been able to discuss, like, where is the state of running or track and field as a sport within the economy? Like, there's such a discrepancy between different sports. Where are we at?
It's really interesting because when you look at professional sports here in America, there is always money. And whether you're looking at something like basketball or football or fill in the blank, any professional sport, we're talking about the amount of money that athletes are making. And it's kind of disclosed, it's out there. In track and field, that's not the case. And the reason behind that is a lot more complicated than just, everybody has to sign a non-disclosure agreement. It's more so because when you're signing a contract in a sport like football or basketball, you're signing it for a team through a league. And so you have the NBA, you have the NFL, you have these bigger bodies that have a lot more governance over the sport than our own governing body, Usatf, does. And a big part of that is just because track and field the reality is it's an individual sport. Your performances define who you are. And, we can put on these team events and they're a lot more fun when they're done as a team. But your value as an athlete to a brand or a company is not determined by what your best friend on the team can do. And that's the reality of the sport, is that, somebody else can't win that gold medal for you. And so it's complicated to sign. When we talk about contracts and where the money is, it's a lot more complicated than, if like Nike disclosed how much all of their athletes were making, everybody would just be shocked and heads would be flying. But at the same time, there's no one way to fix where the money is going. So a lot of it is kind of stuck in limbo. So I guess is a good way to put it. There's more money. I believe that there's more money that athletes can be making. It's just not finding its way through the right medium. And so I think that's going to lead to, a bigger catalyst in the sport that requires a restructuring of the organization of how professional track and field is done in America. And whether that's through the form of a new, more cohesive running circuit, or, whether we see what's happening with Sound Running and with Trials of Miles, two great organizations that have come out of the woodwork to create opportunities for athletes to show up and make money. And in some of those areas, they're actually helping to pay for athletes to get to those events, which is one of the biggest barriers for these athletes, just showing up in the first place.
Yeah. And the more that they're out there, the more publicity there is, the more money will be within the sport as well. I was discussing, I'm in marketing, and I was discussing with one of the sponsor recruiters for pro bass, so professional anglers. And he was telling me how much money is in the sport. It's a lot. It's more than running. That was around the same time as like the Diamond League was going on. I'm like, the biggest purses that you get for Diamond League don't even come close to what these guys make in professional fishing. And I think that there, like you were saying, there is more money to be had if there was just more hype. And that kind of leads me to a question: what can we all do to help elevate the sport?
It's a really good question. It's one I'm trying to answer through my film. And one thing I've discovered is that everybody, regardless of whether you believe it or not, you do have a part that you can play. And if, for some people, that's paying $6 to watch a pro meet for, some athletes that you've never heard of before. But I promise you that $6 will be worth it, because by the end of the night, you'll be told some great stories about some athletes and you'll become engaged with their path. For others, it's just lacing up your spikes every day and getting after it, knowing that there might not be money on the other side of it. And it's tough for me to visualize how we can continue to grow the sport at this rate. because social media and, journalism within the sport is booming. But, a lot of the people that I know that are starting to gain a following doing this, whether it's, just as a hobby or as a full-time thing, they're taking a big leap of faith because there's no money that they're chasing. They're chasing the good of the sport. So everybody does have a part to play, and it's uncomfortable spaces, unfortunately, but you have to grow through discomfort. It's really the only way to do it. So my encouragement for people who don't know much about the sport is start listening to the athlete stories. Start listening a little bit more into, or start watching the meets that they're running. Even if you don't know anybody, grab a couple of your running buddies, sit down and just meet some athletes. Because you talk about the NBA or the NFL, any big sports league, especially, now with Formula One, that's a big sport that is coming. Like, people are jumping on the Formula One train so rapidly, and it's because the stories behind these athletes. And unless you meet these athletes and you can understand their own stories and you can latch onto it because there's some part of their story that is in line with your own, then you can't hope to really gain passion for it. So get uncomfortable, start watching some meets. And, if you have, especially with my friends, I'm somebody who's a big track nerd. So I'm always talking about it with them, whether they want to hear it or not. So it's okay to get in your friends' faces about the sport. Just do it.
I definitely have. My friends can tell you that I have. In fact, that our podcast, every week we have the world of running, and a lot of our listeners here today are listening today are nodding along with you because a lot of our listeners have just kind of gotten into it, and now they are track and field nerds. They're running nerds and follow this world of running. And there's so much to unpack and explore and discover. And there are so many amazing runners all over the world and at different distances. So you can never really tap out on finding out all the stories of these professional athletes, which is really cool. And what we found is that it invigorates our own passion in the sport and a lot of our listeners too, to be able to follow along and watch this journey of excellence from those at the top. So that's been a really cool thing too. Now, I was able to see your trailer, which was amazing, by the way. And you have, like you mentioned, lots of big names that have decided to give you interviews, which is really cool. Congrats on that. One of the things that was discussed was like Usatf. Do you want to kind of talk with our audience about, what is the organization? And a lot of us don't know all the details that go into these logistics.
Yeah. So full disclosure, I am a Usatf member, as many people in the track and field world have to be. But I've gotten a lot of great resources from Usatf as an organization. And so when we talk about USA Track and Field, they are the national governing body of the sport of track and field in America. And so one of their biggest responsibilities, when the Olympic cycle kind of runs its course, is that they are responsible for determining which athletes go to the Olympics and which athletes don't. And, we do that through USA Championships, which is a USATF event. And they also create and develop a year-long circuit for, when I say year-long, it's more season-based for indoor and outdoor, but they have this indoor and outdoor track and field circuit, as well as road racing, in order to provide opportunities for athletes to show up and qualify for these events, qualify for, USA Championships, but also there's pretty much always a prize purse involved. So there is money to be won. Beyond that, as far as like a community level goes, USATF does a fantastic job of providing resources for aspiring coaches. And that's something that I gained a lot out of from working with them. Is I like to say my claim to fame is that I'm the youngest USATF level 2 endurance certified coach in history. And so I had a really big passion for coaching. I still do have a really big passion for coaching. I've coached middle schoolers and high schoolers and a couple collegiate athletes, but they do a really good job of providing resources for coaches. I stop and say for coaches because when it comes to athletes and at the professional level, beyond the events, there's a lot of room for growth. And so in that movie trailer, the first person that comes into the trailer is Trip Hurt, and he is a professional athlete in the sense of his times, but he doesn't have a contract. He made it all the way to the USA Olympic trials in the 1500 meters, but with no brand to his name. And so nobody was backing him. This was all kind of done on his own. And one of the things I discussed with him is the fact that USA Track and Field doesn't care about athletes like him. And, he's not the Noah Lyles of the world. He's not the Galen Rupp. He's not the top. And when it comes to resources that are being provided for the athletes that are in this kind of obscure sub-elite area of the sport, there needs to be more resources that USATF as a governing body is giving out to these athletes to kind of chase the stream, because you really don't know what you're losing out on by not giving an opportunity to all these athletes. And so USATF does a fantastic job for what they're doing so far, but we cannot be blind to the fact that they really need to grow as far as a governing body goes. They're a good organization for the sport, but it needs to we got to see a lot of changes in the way that they operate, especially as a nonprofit. They should care about the growth of the sport. And for instance, for the club cross country championships that just happened, nobody knows about them because USATF didn't post about them once. And, in the day of the events, there wasn't a single tweet put out by USA Track and Field. And it's like, this is a national championship, and you're not promoting your own national championship. And so that's like one of the areas, for example, that they really got to step it up if they want to have more exposure to these athletes.
Yeah, we spoke about them. It was awesome to hear Natasha Rogers defending your title. And yeah, there's a lot of news that does get missed. You're right on that. And it's not the first place that I go for news about what has happened in the world of running. They're definitely not the first ones that pop up or the most timely. So yeah, I didn't even think about that, but it's their own thing that should be promoted. And especially for the sake of the athletes. And then also it's for our unification, right? Because we're supposed to be finding out who's Team USA. These are US athletes. And therefore it's almost like an honor, and being able to demonstrate to the world what we're capable of doing as a country.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that especially when, I'll think about the fact that, for instance, this past couple weekends, we had the Sound Running and Troza Miles kind of put on cross champs. And it was this event that, offered a prize purse that was supposed to be like this end of the season, big professional meet. And there was more hype around that than USATF's own events. And albeit there were some athletes, there were a good amount of athletes that ended up not showing up to cross champs that, we were supposed to see there, but that's a whole nother, that's a whole nother part of the sport that is kind of questionable. And in terms of what do appearances for athletes look like? And yeah.
So I'm going to get down to some things that I just personally want to discuss, and I did not prepare you for this, but I'm just thinking about it. And this is a conversation. So I would love if you'd entertain me some of these thoughts. First of all, you had talked about the idea of the exposure piece. This is my understanding that you can only have a 2x2 inch logo, right? For USATF events.
Yeah. It's 2x2
or yeah. And that's that is, if you have a club, it's a heritage club that's been approved, you can have a bigger one because their logo is larger or something like that. Could there possibly be something that changes that allows for athletes to represent more brands or have a way of promoting brands that might support them?
Absolutely. And, that's a decision that, again, falls on USATF. They I love talking about Nick Simmons in this regard, because Nick Simmons had his, he was just starting out. He was one of the things that he did is he sold part of his actual arm for a temporary tattoo for a company. I think T-Mobile paid on eBay some $10,000 to $20,000 for that spot on his arm, and it ended up having to be taped up because USATF couldn't allow him to be showing off a brand that wasn't a USATF member or a partner, or, it's beyond the guidelines. It's beyond the guidelines. And so, again, in my trailer, one thing that Sinclair Johnson talked about is the fact that, NASCAR and Formula One, you have all these brands who are supporting the athletes, and they can't show them off.
Yeah.
And so,
same with Bass Pro, by the way. The anglers all have many. It's just like
right.
NASCAR, and these
Right.
are the ones that are making the most amount of money.
Yeah, and exactly. And for somebody to say you can't earn this money because it's against our rules, and we wouldn't be making a cut of that money, just does not seem fair. And the only people who this is hurting is the athletes themselves. USATF in this regard is just acting kind of selfishly, and whether that's a contractual obligation with their partners that they already have, sure, that could be a thing. For instance, there's this big controversy happening right now with USATF and their long-term partnership with Nike. Is it fair? The reality is that it's kind of stifling competition as far as who can partner with USATF and who's making the kits for all these big events. It's up in the air. And so my encouragement to USA Track and Field as one of their members would be to just listen to your athletes over the boardroom meetings, because those are your constituents and those are the people you're trying to support. And if it gets to a point where they find that they can't be supported, they're going to find something else to do. And it's going to be a loss for both USATF, but also our country. So.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure. And I think one of the reasons that, though, and I'm going to speak to the amazing part of runners in general, and I'm going to be kind of broad about it, but I think the reason that runners do it is because they really do love it. And I hear time and time again on our podcast when we have athletes on the show that it's more than a job for them. They really do love and care about the sport, and that's what's keeping them in it. It's likely not the money. It's likely not the recognition. It's because they truly love the sport. So that's a kind of a testament to where we are right now, even being a powerhouse, with there being some difficult things about being a pro runner. We have done really well globally despite that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's, you look at, especially on the women's side, my gosh, we crushed it this Olympics. And it was so fun to see all these stories kind of transpire from, athletes that shouldn't have even been there. But yeah, for runners to enjoy running in the first place is a very special thing, as the world will tell you that, running is a sport that has to be intrinsic in order for you to continue on with it. It has to be motivation that has to come from inside of yourself. It has to be motivation that you are fueling from within. I don't think any amount of money in the world could take an NFL player out of, the league and turn them into a distance runner. So yeah, I think that there's a true testament to the fact that, there are people who, I love stories like Carrie Verdin, who, are full-time mom, and, she's killing it. She's doing so good. She's doing and realtor, and has this entire life. Sarah Vaughn is a great, those two honestly I love them so much. They'll both.
So do I.
Yeah, they're amazing.
Our audience will tell you I love talking about Kira D'Amato. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so she's so for example, athletes like themselves do everything that they're doing, and it's almost like running is on the side, but it's such a big part of who they are that they refuse to give it up, and look how far it's taken them.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I hear a lot of athletes that have side hustles or things that they have to do that's more consistent, especially when a lot of times contracts will not pay out if you get injured. So you want to have like a backup plan and some security elsewhere. So I think that runners really do make it work. And it'd be awesome though to see them runners, professional runners treated like the rest of the professional athlete world, if that makes sense, in a sense, where they can continue to have a means by which they don't have to worry that they are going to be paid in the coming months if they, get hurt or something.
Right. Yeah. And that's a good point too, especially, for a lot of these athletes, it's, they could be fine on the money, but a lot of them aren't even getting health insurance or, a means to support themselves in that way. And for a runner to not have health insurance, I mean, come on, you want to talk about injuries and the amount of care it takes to avoid them. It's so much more worthwhile to provide that rather than getting injured and then seeing those bills. So yeah, there's a lot of gray areas that exist that, if you brought them up in person to somebody, they would say like, that makes zero sense. But the response just has to be, oh, well, it is what it is. And that complacency is starting to fade. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot more change start to spark up.
Yeah, that's a good point. So what are some things that our listeners can be paying attention to in the world of running? Things that you would like to see happen soon as far as fans go? Like, go ahead and tell us what do you think the fans should do?
I think you should start as a fan. I think that you should really experience the sport in person. I think that's one of the most powerful things you can do. So I would get on USATF's calendar and look at the events that they're hosting. Look online through, obviously you can find it through AtoZrunning as well, but they'll see what events are happening. And if they're local enough to you, show up. I promise they're not expensive. And the reality is that if you show up and you can see these events in person, chances are you might even get to meet the athletes too. Running is a very accessible sport at the professional level. And that's something that I discovered in reaching out to so many people to be a part of my film. I got a lot more yeses than I thought I ever would, but it's because people care about the sport and they care about building it. And so as a fan, yeah, it's important to seek out these opportunities to just be a fan. And especially if, I just think it's so important to be there in person. I know COVID makes it really, really awkward, but we're going into a very event heavy next couple of years. On the big calendars, we have Indoor USA champs happening in Spokane, Washington, leading up to Indoor Worlds, leading up to the whole outdoor season that has Outdoor Worlds happening for the first time ever on American soil, which I promise that'll be worth your time to invest into it. And even if let's say you're local to Eugene, Oregon, where the Worlds are happening, you can find like $25 tickets for some of those days. And those are going to be booming. So it's little things like that to just get involved beyond your comfort zone or beyond the community that you have value in. That's the way to really go out and meet more people who can help grow the sport too.
And I want to remind our audience, this more than any other sport is a place where you can belong if you're a runner, because there's something that connects all runners, professional onto recreational, onto occasional, onto beginner. So running is one of the sports that I would love to see even more fan interest, community interest, because we belong there. We belong as runners to cheer on other runners. There is something we understand at the discomfort, the work that goes into achieving some of these things that we see the professionals doing. We can understand it. And NFL can't say that. Most of their fans don't play. they're part of a community of fans, but they're not part of the running community. And I think we have something really special that we have going on in running that can make it something that's very meaningful beyond just being a fan.
Yeah, I love the idea of reminding myself, especially on the hard days, that my 100% effort on that day feels just the same as a pro athlete's 100% effort on that day. You know, it's the speed will not look the same, I promise you that. But the fact that we can both give 100% effort when we get on the line, it's pretty amazing. And it's what kind of fuels so much of the connection of, you know, they're hurting just like I hurt. And so that, you know, they're enjoying it just as much as I do. So yeah, you really can't say that about any other sport.
It's a really cool thing. So Alex, I am going to link to your trailer. I would love to hear some timelines so that our audience can follow the happenings of your documentary. Alex and the track, or Alex and track? What's your handle? Alex and track. Okay, so they can follow you on Instagram there. Okay, tell us about the timeline of your documentary.
Yeah, so the documentary, by this point, we'll have had a pre-production showing and forum of the sport. So we'll have had people kind of within the sport and both within the community kind of experience a little bit of it. As those events kind of happen in early January, there will be more trailers starting to come out and funnel through those mediums, both on Instagram and on YouTube. On YouTube, you can find me as Alex Andrei on the track. So a lot of different names there, but the goal for this film, as of about 2 or 3 weeks ago, is I think we finally found a way to premiere it during the World Championships here in the summer. So,
whoa,
yeah,
that'd be amazing.
That's cool. Kind of the big news right now, that I haven't found a way to really talk about it, but here we are. Yeah, so I think that stay tuned for news on that, but I think that there is going to be opportunities to see the film in person here during Worlds. And beyond that, it will definitely come on as something that's going to be free to viewers. I went into this project writing down in my journal that it's going to be a money pit. And yeah, I'll preface and say that there is no like corporate brand powering this film. It's all done through money that I saved up after college. After I just graduated from college this past May. So money I had saved up to put towards down payment on a car. I said, the heck with it. Let's just go all in on this project. And so, so everything that I want is to just grow the sport. And so because of that, I want it to be free to anybody who wants to have an interest in it. And so July 2022, the film will premiere. And it's going to be something that both the fan of the sport and the fan of running can really kind of get drawn into. And that's my big hope for it.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Alex. We appreciate your time. We appreciate what you bring to our sport, and you're like a changer in the sport. And I love to see how you are bringing this about by storytelling. I think it's really powerful, and we'll be sure to be promoting what you're doing on the A to Z Running podcast.
Always appreciate you guys. And of course, remember, you can see A to Z Running in the film itself too. So a little teaser to get more of your fans involved.
Awesome. If we don't make the cut, it's okay. You don't have to promise us anything. I know you have a lot of good content there.
Oh, you're in the cut. Don't worry.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. Well, Alex, it's always great to connect. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you so much. Good to see you too.
As you probably heard in that conversation with Alex, we share a lot of the same passion when it comes to the sport of running and the community that running holds, and how we, as the running community, have some access to the understanding of the sport of running. And we're actually able to engage with some of these athletes, and that's unusual compared to other professional sports. And I think it's really cool that running can bring us together, that shared experience that we talked about with Diane last week. It kind of, it comes full circle over and over again as we discuss the sport of running, the participation of running, the action of running. So you can get involved. And I encourage you to check out the work that Alex is doing and other content creators that can help you engage with the sport even more. And I do believe, as part of my experience, I guess I can't promise you, but being part of the sport can help your own running. And it can help you succeed as well and really invigorate what you're doing day to day.
And speaking of invigoration, we've got some really fascinating things to share, so let's get right on to the world of running. A couple quick shout outs to some A to Z
Shout out.
runners to begin our segment here. First is Carl at the Resolution Run, ran in a 4-mile race what would have been a 5K PR.
Within it, yeah.
Within it. So that's good,
Yeah.
when you can run 5K PR and then continue running.
That's an understatement.
That's excellent stuff.
Excellent job, Carl.
Indeed. So good work, Carl. And then Andrew, who in a half marathon, kind of what you might consider like a kind of chill day for him, finished 3rd in his age group.
Wow.
Which is great. And 7th or 8th overall, depending on whether or not you count the one who started the race much farther behind, but then still ran a fast time.
Okay.
You know how like chip time versus gun time, all
Okay.
that. Yeah. Well, anyway, great work, Andrew.
Great work.
Carl. Proud to be working with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And speaking of good things,
USATF Cross Country Championships, not to be confused with the team competition that we mentioned a month ago.
the Club Cross Country Championships, which is not the overall Cross Country Championships.
Right. It's a little confusing. So on the women's side, winning her first national title as a pro and previous podcast guest, Alicia Munson.
On Athletics Club.
One for on the women's side. She's of, the OAC, and she's coached by Dathan Ritzenheim. So a lot of you local connections will know who Dathan is. Well, I guess anybody in the running community knows who Dathan is.
If you're listening to this, you got to know.
You got to know,
And if
because
you
we
don't,
talk
now
about
you
him
do.
on the regular. So she won at a time of 34:01.
Nice. On a cross-country course.
Yes, she did. Over Wayne Colati by 17 seconds.
17 seconds.
Yeah.
And Wayne Colati's been hot in the
She
fall,
has.
running a bunch of impressive stuffs. And Monson, had a good summer.
Yeah.
It
At
was
the
all right.
Olympics.
It was all right at the Olympics.
That's funny. Third was Emily Durgan. And following Emily was Stephanie Bruce, and then previous guest Natasha Rogers in 6th.
So lots of good things going on. In fact, we'll mention someone else here in a little backstory about a runner shortly. But for the men's side, it seems to be the case quite a bit lately. And maybe this is actually kind of just it's a fairly common thing in championship
I feel
races
like
in general.
more lately, though,
Maybe.
this year.
And what it is that we are intimating, it was another very fast sprint finish type of scenario.
Battling
Kick
to the finish.
to the line.
Yep.
Which is really the most exciting way to race
It
and to
is.
watch races. It's just so exciting. I got to say, when you're in that moment in the race and it's like, I know I've got a chance at this, I'm in the pack and the line's getting closer and closer and I'm still there, the adrenaline spike is so high that sometimes you have to just consciously contain yourself because I can't go yet, but my body is freaking out wanting me to just bust it. And that's, time after time, it would seem, at these levels. So the cross-country championships was no different. Who were the players, Andy?
Oh, Shadrach Kipchirchir, he won. And this is not his first time winning the
Not at
event. So he ran a strong race, but on his heels, only 2 seconds behind, was Dylan Maggard and previous podcast guest Sam Chalenga, who were in the same second.
Okay, so
there
all
was a battle
three
for
within a couple seconds.
Exactly.
Yes.
So they were really battling it out to the finish. And now Sam Chalenga, he's been in a lot of these battles recently, and he's been getting a lot of podium finishes. So it's been exciting to see Sam do so well. But also, he's like, it's going to come.
When am I
That
gonna
W
win
is
it?
going to come.
So
at
second
some
and
point.
third are very familiar places. But
Yeah. So he's always there in the battle. And then Leonard Creer was 4th, and upcoming podcast guest Bernard Keeter, who is a steeplechase Olympian for the USA, was 6th place.
So that was a seriously competitive group.
It was.
To begin
Very
with.
competitive year for cross country.
That's good. These are
Exceptional
always fun
racing.
times. I love the U.S. Cross Country Championship because you get a lot of those like track studs who are also good at cross country but don't really do cross
On
country
the regular,
much.
right.
And then they show up at the cross country championships and just battle it out on
You
the
have to be
grass.
so
It's great.
strong. You have to be so strong to do cross country. And a lot of they come from like below the distance and above the distance too. So you get like marathoners that
True.
will show up at the
get
event, but then
middle
also
distance
middle
runners,
distance.
you get
So I love
steeplechasers.
the toss up
Yeah.
because it's just like so rarely do these athletes run against each other in cross country. It's really
true.
just a couple times
It's
a
true.
year.
Yep. Good, exciting times.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for the second on the list, let's jump all the way up to ultra marathoning for a moment. And at the world level, because Alexander Sorokin of, what is it, Lithuania?
Yes, Lithuania.
Alexander Sorokin, who goes by Sanya, broke 2 world records in one race. So he ran the 12-hour race. This would have been, as reported by Canadian Running, by the way, the Spartanian, something like that.
Yes.
In Israel.
That's correct.
Yes, it's a 12-hour race in Israel. This was on January 6th. And he, by the way, has in the last year set 3 or 4 world records at ultra races. And so there's more on that in a moment, but he's just been on a roll. And so he shows up at this 12-hour race ready to go.
Right. These are his own records,
These
by
are
the
his
way.
own records that he broke, yes. Now, here's
Break it down,
I'm setting
Zach,
this
break
up
it down.
because this will just make you cringe. It will make you cringe because it sounds like this is impossible. Okay, for 100 miles. So this is a 12-hour race. He ran well over 100 miles in the 12 hours.
But
we'll get to
get
that in a moment.
100-mile.
But he ran the 100-mile world record
Within
as
it.
well
Mhm.
within the 12 hours. And that time was 10 hours, 51 minutes, 39 seconds. So 10:51, which is 23 minutes better than his previous world record, which was also chunks and handfuls better
Significant.
than the other previous
Yeah.
world. So like he's
He's
just
at another level.
he's
of
just
ultra
gone
running.
somewhere that nobody knows about. No one knows
Exactly.
how to follow him right now to where he
Uh-huh.
has gone. And that's really just amazing stuff.
Not even his past self at this point.
Yeah, no, not from 6 months ago.
I know. It's
Okay.
insane.
So we're getting there, but we're not there yet because he also in the 12-hour race ran 110 miles.
110 miles,
which is
folks.
4 miles plus or minus more than he's run in 12
That's
hours
such a
in
journey.
the past.
That's such
his
a
other world
journey
record.
in only
Wow.
11 hours. 100 miles?
Yes. Okay. So consider these things for a second because this
Yeah.
is what this means. So the 12-hour run, by the way, then Andy, it was basically about 28 minutes faster than his previous 12-hour
Okay.
record. So he came through 100, and then he bought himself a few more minutes still off of the next record. It's just, yeah, it's
Wow.
crazy. Well, okay.
Wow.
So let's put it in perspective. This means that he was running about 6 minutes and 30 seconds per mile for 12 full hours. Which, of course, he's not just running straight. Like, he's stopping occasionally for the things you need to stop occasionally for
Right.
in these runs. So he's running under 6:30 a mile. Yep, that's good.
Wow.
Okay, now, according to Canadian Running, which is just kind of a great little stat, this means that if we're doing this by 5Ks, he ran 35 5Ks in a row at about 20 minutes and 15 seconds.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just the perspective of it just really helps me understand how incredible this world record is.
Yeah. So that's cool. But here's the thing.
The history.
Sorokin holds 4 ultramarathon world records from the let's see what's the shortest one here. He has the 150K, the 100-mile, the 12-hour, and the 24-hour world records. All of them. And I don't know if it's 3 or all 4 he broke in the last year. So
Wow.
his 24-hour record was in August of 2021, not long after he had broken the 100 and the 12-hour previously, within the same year in 2021. So that's not bad stuff. In 24 hours, by the way, he ran 192 and a quarter miles. Yep. And in 150K, he ran that in 10 hours, 27 minutes, 48 seconds.
Okay, so that means that he ran a little bit faster, though, for this,
A little bit faster for the...
right? For the 100-mile? No,
for the 100
I don't know. Math is hard.
Well, so his 12-hour was 177K. So
Oh, okay.
You kind of do the numbers from there. But we didn't calculate that out ahead of time, and math is hard. But he is 40 years old.
Yeah.
And this is what he's doing at 40. So this is why the backstory matters so much. He started running at 32 years of age, right?
Started running.
Now, that's not to say he wasn't like athletic or something,
Yeah.
because he was a kayak sprinter as a junior.
That's a very different sport, though.
Yes, he was a kayak sprinter at the Lithuanian national team in the junior world championships. So
Which was
that's cool.
That was a long time ago, though.
Well,
you
yes,
know?
because he's 40 years old now.
Yeah.
And to be in that, you have to be like under 18. But
right. I'd like to know if he
Or
what
under
other
20.
extra sport stuff that he did after he
Well,
was
that's just
junior.
it. So here's what he says. He basically, this is by Canadian Running. Again, they have an article on him here that we were reading. And he basically said that, like, in those in-between years, he really wasn't doing much athletic or active much at all. As a matter of fact, according to him, and I quote, "I began running to get in shape when I weighed 100 kilograms, which is about 220 pounds. And at the same time, I wasn't playing any sports, just drinking and smoking a lot."
So he made a life change.
So at 32 years of age, where he's 220 pounds and drinking and smoking a lot, he says to himself,
he pivoted.
I would like to see something different here.
He pivoted.
So here's how it goes. He starts running, and then after a few months of running, he decides to do a half marathon. Well, naturally, that's, I guess that's okay. It's not like he's doing anything too crazy long, but half marathon is hard when it's your first distance race.
Like, what about a 5K?
Yeah, no, he didn't start there. He's just like, I'm going to do a half marathon. Okay. But it wasn't long after that half marathon, like months, when one of his friends basically says something like, hey, have you heard about this 100K? And he's like, oh, that sounds cool. Let's do a 66-mile race. And so he goes he goes from a half marathon up to ultra marathons instantly, never looks back. And now 8 years later, he's breaking all the world
records. Running 6:30 pace for 100 miles.
Yeah. So that's that. When we talk about just an incredible thing, that is incredible stuff.
It's incredible.
One
it
more really
is.
fascinating.
Like, if he can pivot, like, I just want to.
Yeah, I'll let you. Yep.
If he can pivot like that and make a life change and become passionate, like, we can all do that. We can all make pivots. It might not be
you
to
can run the 24-hour world record
level. It might not be at that level, but we can make some serious pivots in our lives, and we can hustle after big dreams and get after it.
And conversely, if Ryan Hall, the American record holder in the half marathon and 204 marathoner, can become a bodybuilder and gain 90 pounds in a couple months. Anyway, I'm going the opposite direction.
Right,
he had a strong pivot, too.
All that is to say, we can pivot.
Okay. Yes, and it's good stuff. So I just wanted to mention here one more quick note about Sorokin because it was fascinating. He, before his previous time breaking the 12-hour world record in 2021, he was approached by a friend who gave him these shoes and said, hey, you should try these. These are pretty nice. And they were, of course, the Nike Alpha Flies. And he had never worn them before. So not like days-ish before his 12-hour race, he tries them on and he's like, oh, these feel really soft. I'm going to wear them. And so he does, and, breaks world records.
The world's record.
And then later on, in talking about it, says, yeah, they're just so comfortable and soft. I think soft shoes are good for running ultras because, helps with recovery. That was hilarious. Great. Yeah. And he continues to wear them, by the way.
Wow.
Yep. Well, I don't know if it's the same pair of shoes. I imagine that you can't really wear Alpha Flies for more than one 12-hour race.
Every race he needs a new pair.
Speaking of new and interesting backstories, number 3 on our list here, Carrie Verdin, who has made a fascinating comeback in the last couple years and is kind of like on the verge of the radar for a lot of people. But we encountered the story published by Fast Women, not like just random fast people, but the website Fast Women, and on January 5th, so a recent article that they published, and talking about where this fascinating up and down has happened for Carrie.
Yeah, so Carrie was a high school stud. She finished 11th at, in California, which if you're 11th in California, you're really good as a freshman, and state champ as a junior and senior. So automatically, like, this is a talented woman, and she was 19th at Foot Locker Cross Country Nationals.
And so that's great. Basically decides to start running as a freshman and is immediately one of the best in the country. Because
as a freshman.
If you're one of the best in California, it means you're one of the best in the country.
Right, and 19th at Foot Locker demonstrates
and that a couple
as
of
a
years
freshman.
Later. No, that was junior year.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, but so clearly over the course of her high school years, demonstrated herself to be one of the best runners in the nation, one of the best prep runners. So she goes to Colorado, which is naturally a place where some of the best runners go to college. And as a freshman, great, hit it off very well. She, in fact, was competing, I think it was at the the World U20 Championships, I believe in cross country, and finished like 20th place or something.
Oh, okay.
Like, that's really great stuff. But then the injury stuff.
Oh, man.
As is often the tale, starts to struggle with injury and really can't get out of it. And college does not go. She says she's not satisfied with the way college ends. So graduates from Colorado in 2017, unsatisfied, but doesn't give up. And this is good. Props to her.
Never give up.
Does not give up.
That's a good part of the story.
She seeks a pivot. looks for a change. And she joins up with Lee Troop. Lee Troop is the one who coaches that team
Bill
boulder
Riley,
group.
right?
Yep,
Jake
he
Riley?
coaches Jake Riley. I'm not sure who Bill Riley is, but coaches Jake Riley and a number of others who have made a similar kind of Lee Troop seems to be great at taking somebody out of a not great place and bringing them back into centering them. He seems to really have a knack for that.
I have to say that from what I see from Jake Riley, he does a lot of the injury prevention type of stuff.
Oh, yeah. They're on it over there.
He focuses on the foundations. So I'll just put that out
there. Yeah, well, and
as we speak to that.
And the quote, I was going to say this at the end, but I'll say it now because it connects. One of the things that Verdin said about Lee Troop and the work that they were doing is that it clicked for her that the most important thing was to be healthy so she could train, compete, and continue to do everything she loves. And therein lies the secret, right?
That's the theme.
If I can do this in a healthy state and do this then which naturally was the work that they did. And so Lee Troop was able to help her get to that point, as she described it. And in doing so, only a few years later, and she describes it as it was a few years of healthy training, she stomped back into the picture in 2020, running 32:09 in a 10K.
If I could whistle, I'd be whistling right now.
Yeah, right. Months later, don't do it, please. We don't want to hear that. Months later, she ran 15:18 in a 5K. So then she shows up at the U.S. Olympic trials, but this was 2021, just a little bit ago, running the 5K, 10K double. Okay, so we're talking about years of not really, just struggling and not being there. And then suddenly she's doubling at the Olympic trials. She finished 10th in the 5K final, struggled in the heat in the 10K, which was a bummer, but then came back in the fall of 2021 at that blazing hot Chicago Marathon. Maybe she learned some lessons from that U.S. trials race, who knows? But she ran 7th place in her debut marathon at Chicago.
It's so impressive. Whoa. It's just
really
so
cool.
impressive. And I think the impressive thing, and I'd love to talk to Carrie sometime about this, but having such success as a young athlete and then struggling with injury and just, I call it chasing the phantom ponytail. For my experience, I've struggled with that on a lesser level than that. But I would imagine it'd be so difficult to have such success and then have a hard time returning to that. And so for her years later to be able to return to this healthy space and to be able to achieve those personal bests, I think is a humongous victory that took a lot of physical, of course, dedication, but then the mental aspect is no joke.
You should couple that with things like she teaches first grade for her day job.
That's
so she's
why
a
she
lower
has such great
elementary
mental
school
strength.
teacher.
Yes.
Which is incredible. And
Yes.
and the comment is, trying to balance 85 to 105 miles a week of running with, full-time teaching.
The energy it must take to be with little ones like that
I don't even
do distance running training. Wow.
Props to you,
Props,
Miss Verdin.
Carrie.
So, yes, incredible stuff. And we should note, she did also run the U.S. Cross Country Championships. I said earlier we were going to come back to another one. She finished 9th in
she's
that
top
race.
10.
So she's doing
Fantastic.
marathons, she's on the track, she's doing cross country, and all of it at the highest level of her life here after all of this work. And let me just simply go back to then the final point, which is the main point, that the most important thing was to be healthy so she could train, compete, and continue to do everything she loves.
Mm-hmm.
And that is quite a story.
Yeah, sounds like a thriving runner to me.
Bonus.
Zach didn't even see that I had this in here, but I have to talk about it because
of course.
previous podcast guest,
yeah.
Brittany Charbonneau, she was on our podcast talking about creativity on the run. So adding creativity, fun to your run and your lifestyle of running. She won the 5K, 10K, half marathon, and full marathon at the 2022 Walt Disney World Marathon Weekend. Which
Save
is
some for someone else, why don't you?
Straight days of the Dopey Challenge. So she not only...
Did you just call her Dopey?
That was the Dopey Challenge. Like Dopey, like the...
Wait, so is the challenge
dwarf?
Dopey? Or is...
I mean, it does seem a little
dopey?
loopy to do. I mean,
yes.
I have to say, that is quite the feat. That's a lot of
Andy,
running.
But what was she dressed
Oh,
as?
yeah. Okay, so she did it all in costume. And if you know Brittany, she loves the theatrics. Like, she loves having there be some sort of creative aspect to her training and to her racing. So she did it all in costume.
Of course she did. Why
Yeah.
not?
And
Which costumes?
Okay, so she won the 5K dress as Elsa from Frozen.
Okay, yes, classic. Yep.
And then
Good.
10K as Bing Bong from Inside Out.
I don't know what that is, but it sounds like it would be funny. Okay, keep
For
going.
the half marathon, she led the pack as Joy, another
Okay.
character from Inside Out.
That
and
sounds like an emotion.
It is, because from the Inside Out movie, which I don't think we've seen it yet, but I saw.
Is it hard to watch when it's inside out like that?
Jokes.
And
You
then
got
in
jokes.
the marathon,
In the marathon, she
fittingly,
was. Yes, she was Cruella DeVille
Why
from
not?
101 Dalmatians. Yeah, it was pretty cool.
it was especially controversial that she was wearing the real fur of real Dalmatians.
She wasn't. She was wearing North
But it
Face,
was-
who is her sponsor.
It was just shaved off of them first. No harm done to any Dalmatians in the creating of this
You're taking
costume.
this joke too far. But anyway, I just wanted to give that shout out to Brittany Charbonneau because she's one that we love to follow, love to watch. She does great things in the sport of running, and she keeps it fun and
That-
entertaining for us.
That is the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of the truth, that's it for today.
It is.
This is the end.
This is the
And
end.
that is also true.
But it's not the end because you can continue to follow A to Z Running. Also, check out Alex and the work that he's doing too. If you love running and you love the sport of running, he's a great person to follow his work and especially this project that he's doing with the state of the sport.
And don't forget, you need to jump on YouTube or Instagram or head to our website, AtoZrunning.com/contact, so you can send us a question. Question about your training, question about running, anything like that in context. Give us the background information so when we share on our episode at the end of the month, our Q&A with your questions, we may feature yours.
Absolutely.
So do those things. Also, if you find A to Z Running helpful, and of course, we already know the answer to that one, let us know with a review on Apple, share it with a running friend,
We
talk
appreciate
about
it.
the things that are good, right?
Yeah, we know you have a lot of choices when it comes to content that you can put in your ears. So
But
the
they're
fact
not this good. So this is definitely,
Zach's really humble. That's
I'm not.
Well, I have to say that we do appreciate it because we do know that there's a lot of things for you to choose, and the fact that you choose to listen to us, we love that we've connected and created community together.
It also means that you must have a high tolerance for annoying people like Zach. But finally, if you are looking for something more direct in your training and running, of course, you should check us out at AtoZrunning.com looking for the word coaching up at the top, because if there is indeed a way that we can support you, we would love to have the conversation.
Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you next week.